When my son shouted at me that day, his voice echoed off the living room walls like thunder. "Why'd you sell the apartment without me?" He yelled, his eyes sharp, his jaw trembling. My wife and I had plans for it. For a second, I thought he was joking. My hands froze around the teacup, and I stared at him. My only son. The one I had raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights. The same boy I had carried through sickness, through hunger, through years when I could barely afford school shoes for him. But no, the anger in his eyes wasn't play. It was entitlement. It was something darker. He stood there, in the very home I had built with his late father, accusing me as though I had stolen from him. And in that moment, something inside me cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but softly, like the sound of an old tree splitting in a quiet forest. I wanted to speak, to explain that the apartment was mine. Bought by my sweat, not his. That the decision wasn't about him, or his wife's plans, but about me trying to survive. But the words wouldn't come. He slammed his hand on the table and said, "You didn't even ask me, Ma. We could have used that apartment. We needed it for rent money. You never think of us. You never think of us." It was almost funny how those words burned. Because for 30 years, all I had ever done was think of him. Every meal, every decision, every sleepless night, all revolved around him. And now, in return, I was being scolded like a thief. He stormed out before I could reply. The door shut hard enough to shake the photo frames on the wall. Pictures of birthdays, graduations, the day his father died, and the day I thought we'd both grown closer because of that loss. But grief changes people in ways you don't expect. And maybe it had changed my son too. Though I wasn't ready to admit it then. That night, I sat alone, staring at the empty chair, where he used to eat his dinner as a child, spilling rice on the floor, and laughing when I'd pretend to scold him. I remembered his tiny fingers reaching for my hand, his sleepy voice saying, "Don't sell my toys, Mama. I'll come back for them." And now, decades later, he had come back. Not for toys, but for property. Not with love, but with accusation. I didn't cry that night. I just sat there, letting silence stretch around me like a heavy blanket. The walls of that small house knew everything. The fights, the sacrifices, the birthdays we celebrated with just one candle on a half cake. I whispered to them, as if to the ghosts of my past. When did my love become a burden? It was the first time I realized that love, when given without boundaries, can turn into something dangerous. Something people take for granted. And as the dawn crept through the curtains, soft and gold, I told myself quietly, maybe this is how betrayal begins, not with strangers, but with those who once called you home. I wasn't always this lonely woman sitting in a half-empty house. Once, there was laughter here. Once, the smell of my husband's favorite cardamom tea filled the air every evening, and our small world felt whole. My husband, Yassine, was a simple man, quiet, hardworking, and loyal to a fault. He worked as a clerk at the railway office, always bringing home a few rupees saved from tea stalls or bus fares. Proud that he could still buy his son a new shirt each Eid. We had one child. Our only blessing, our son, Sad. Born after 7 years of marriage and endless prayers, he was our miracle. The moment I held him in my arms, I remember whispering, "You'll never have to struggle the way we did." And I meant it. Every word. I made sure he had the best education we could afford, tutoring him late at night, selling my gold bangles once when fees became overdue. Yassine and I often ate less so that Sad could eat more. It wasn't sacrifice back then. It was love. Pure, unquestioning love. Sad grew up clever, ambitious, and charming. Everyone said he'd go far. That he was the kind of boy who could talk his way into any opportunity. I was proud. But pride, I've learned, can sometimes blind a mother to the shadows creeping in behind it. When he turned 28, Sad brought home a girl named Samra. She was beautiful. I'll admit that. Sharp features, polished speech, always dressed like she was walking into a magazine photo. But something about her smile never reached her eyes. Still, I tried to love her. I remember saving for months to buy her a gold set on their wedding day. "She's your wife now," I told him. "But she's my daughter too." She smiled politely and said, "Thank you, Auntie." Not Ammy, not even Mama, just Auntie. At the time I brushed it off, maybe she just needed time. But soon, I began to notice the small things. The way she'd frown when Sad hugged me too long, or how she'd roll her eyes when I gave him advice. Little cracks in the walls of our family. Tiny, but growing. After Yasin passed away, a sudden heart attack one rainy night, I felt my whole world collapse. The house that once felt full now echoed with emptiness. But I thought, at least I have Sad. At least I'm not alone. He was devastated too, or at least that's what I believed. He cried at the funeral, holding my hand tightly, promising, "I'll take care of you, Ma. You'll never be alone." Those words became my comfort, my hope. But as the months passed, I saw less and less of him. At first, he said he was busy with work. Then, that Samra's family needed him. Then, that they were planning to move closer to her parents. Just for a while. I told him, "It's all right, Beta. You do what you must." Because mothers never want to be the reason their children feel burdened. Still, I saved every month. Little amounts from my widow's pension. Just in case he ever needed something. I kept the apartment your father had left behind as a safety net, thinking maybe one day Sad might need it for his family. But I should have known. When people see your silence as weakness, they start measuring how far they can push you. Samra began to visit occasionally, but not with warmth. She'd sit on the sofa, scroll through her phone, and make small comments like, "Auntie, this apartment could get a good price in the market now. Why are you just letting it sit?" I'd smile and say softly, "It's my husband's memory. I'm not ready to let it go yet." And she'd just shrug, "Sentiment doesn't pay bills." I laughed it off then. But I noticed how, every few months, Sad started bringing up the same topic. "Ma, you don't even live there anymore. Why not sell it? We could use the money to invest." Or, "We're thinking of renting it out, maybe Samra's cousin could handle it for you." At first, I thought he was just being practical. But soon, practicality started sounding more like persuasion, and persuasion like pressure. Once, I remember telling him gently, "Beta, I'm not ready to sell. Your father worked his whole life for that place. It's all I have left." He sighed, irritated. "You're being emotional again, Ma. It's just a building." Just a building. I wanted to remind him how many nights I'd spent there comforting him through fevers. How that same building had sheltered him through storms, exams, heartbreaks, and dreams. But instead, I just nodded. Because that's what mothers do. We swallow our hurts so our children can stay comfortable. One evening, he brought Samra with him, and she said, in that honeyed voice of hers, "You know, Auntie, if we had that apartment, we could start our business. It helps Sad a lot. You'd be helping your own son." Something in her tone made my stomach turn. But I didn't argue. I simply told her I'd think about it. That night, I sat by the window, looking at the framed photo of my husband. His eyes, calm, kind, seemed to ask, when did love become negotiation? Months passed. Sad stopped calling regularly. When he did, it was usually about the apartment. Every conversation ended with the same line. "Ma, we could do so much with that money." And finally, one morning, I woke up tired. Tired of being seen as a possession holder instead of a person. So I made a quiet decision. I sold the apartment. Not to spite him. Not for revenge. But because I needed the peace that came from knowing no one could dangle it over me again. I used part of the money to secure a small investment for myself, and donated some in Yasin's name, something he always wanted. When Sad found out, he didn't call. He came storming through the door. And you already know what happened then. That's how it began. With love so deep it blinded me. And ended with a shout that broke something sacred between a mother and her child. After that day, the shouting, the slamming of doors, a strange silence filled my house. It wasn't the calm kind of silence that brings peace. It was heavy, like the silence before a storm. Sad didn't come for weeks. No calls, no messages. At first, I told myself he was just upset, that he needed time to cool off. But when a month passed, I realized it wasn't anger he was nursing, it was resentment. Then one afternoon he arrived. Not alone. Samra was with him, her face painted with practiced sweetness. She said, "We came because Sad was worried. You didn't even tell us before selling." "We were shocked, Auntie." I tried to smile, though my chest ached. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," I said softly. "I just needed to do what felt right for me." Samra's eyes narrowed slightly. "But we're family, aren't we? Family discusses such things together. Especially when everyone could benefit." Her words hung in the air like a blade hidden in velvet. Sad said nothing, just crossed his arms and looked away. I served tea, the way I always did. Old habits die slow. But even as I poured it, I noticed. They didn't even touch the cups. They were here not for tea, not for me, but for an explanation. When I finally said, "The apartment was mine, Beta. It wasn't in your name," his jaw tightened. He muttered under his breath, "Maybe it should have been." I didn't reply. Because what could a mother say to that? After they left, I sat for hours, replaying the conversation in my mind. The tone, the pauses, the looks exchanged between them. Something in me knew. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about control. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, small acts of punishment began. Sad stopped visiting altogether. On Eid, I waited with biryani and sheer kurma, dishes I had cooked since he was a child. But my doorbell never rang. When I called, Samra picked up and said in her polite, clipped tone, "Oh, Auntie, we're busy this Eid. Maybe next year." Next year. I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. That evening, I carried 2 plates, one for me, one for Yassine's photo, and whispered, "It's just us again, old friend." Then came the whispers from relatives. I heard that Sad and Samra had been telling people I'd made rash decisions. That I was getting old and didn't know how to handle finances. A cousin even called to say, "Baji, maybe you should let Sad manage things now. It's not safe for an old woman to deal with money alone." Old woman. That's what I had become to them. Not a mother, not a woman who built her home from nothing, but an old woman who needed managing. I smiled politely through the phone and said, "Thank you for your concern," though inside, I was shaking, not with fear but humiliation. A few weeks later, Sad came again. Alone this time, he looked tired, his shoulders tense. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wanted to mend things. But as soon as he sat down, he said, "Ma, I need to see your bank papers." I froze. "Why?" he sighed, impatient. "Because Samra and I think you're being taken advantage of. You shouldn't be handling money. What if you fall for some scam?" I felt my throat tighten. "Sad, I've managed this house my whole life. I'm not a fool." "I didn't say you were," he replied, his tone sharp. "But you're emotional. You don't think logically. We just want to help." "Help," I said quietly. "Be taking over everything that's mine." He looked away, avoiding my eyes. "If that's how you see it, fine. But don't call me when you run out of money." And with that, he left again. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not because he shouted, but because I finally understood that my son saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle. Over the next few months, small cruelties began to pile up. One day, Samra sent a message saying, "Since you've already used the apartment money, maybe you could help us with a small loan." A loan. As if the last threads of love had turned into a ledger. When I politely declined, she stopped speaking to me altogether. Even the grandchildren, little Hamza and Alina, stopped visiting. When I called to hear their voices, she'd say, "They're busy with school." I began to understand what loneliness really meant. It wasn't being alone. It was being forgotten by the very people you once fed from your hands. Sometimes I'd pass their house on my way to the market. I could hear laughter from inside, smell roasted chicken, Sad's favorite. And I'd stop, just for a moment, wondering if they ever thought of me. But I never knocked. Pride is a painful companion, but it's quieter than rejection. One winter evening, a letter arrived, official, thick and cold. It was from a lawyer. Sad had filed a notice requesting financial guardianship over my assets, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage property after my husband's death. My hands shook as I read it. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My son, my blood, had turned me into a case file. That night I sat under the single yellow bulb in the kitchen, papers spread before me, and whispered, "Yassine, your son wants to take everything. What should I do?" I didn't expect an answer. But somehow, in the silence, I felt one, not from him, but from within. A voice that said, "No more." The next morning, I gathered my documents, ironed my dupatta, and went to see a lawyer of my own. Her name was Nadia, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a firm tone. She listened patiently, never once interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Auntie, you've been too kind for too long. It's time someone stands up for you. Even if that someone is you." Her words struck deep. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I'd long buried: dignity. Over the next few weeks, I began to prepare myself for what was coming. Sad and Samra kept trying, calling, manipulating, pleading. One night he said, "Ma, this isn't against you. We're just trying to protect you." I asked quietly, "From what, Sad?" "For my own independence." He went silent. That's when I knew the real reason. It was never about protection. It was about control. And slowly, day by day, I stopped being the scared, apologetic mother. I began reading, asking questions, meeting Nadia regularly. Each time, I felt a little lighter. As though with every signature, every legal step, I was reclaiming a part of myself that I had once given away in the name of love. When Sad realized I wasn't backing down, his tone changed again. He started coming by late at night, pretending to check on me. "Ma, why are you making this ugly? You know we're family," he'd say, his voice soft but eyes cold. And I'd answer, "Because family shouldn't need lawyers to remind them of love." There were moments, brief, fleeting, when I wanted to forgive him, to end this tension and call him my little boy again. But then I'd remember the silence of those aides. The words, maybe it should have been in my name. The petition calling me unfit. And my heart would close again. That's how months passed. Love dying quietly, replaced by paperwork, distance, and the slow unraveling of trust. And though it broke me to admit it, I had finally begun to see my son for who he had become. Not the boy I raised, but the man who forgot that a mother's love isn't a bank account to be managed. I don't know when sadness turned into shame. There's a difference, you know. Sadness is quiet. It lets you cry. It lets you grieve. But shame makes you lower your eyes in front of people you used to greet with pride. The day the lawyer's notice became public, I couldn't even step outside. Neighbors whispered when I walked to the market. Someone even said, "Poor woman, her own son's taking her to court." And that word, court, it stung. I'd spent my whole life teaching my son to be honest, humble, respectful. And now, here I was, being treated like a thief in my own story. I stopped going out. The curtains stayed drawn. The house, once filled with life, smelled of dust and old tears. I would sit for hours, tracing the pattern on the teacup Sad had bought me on Mother's Day years ago. It was cracked now, but I couldn't throw it away. It was the last gift he ever gave with love. Sometimes I'd hear the laughter of children outside. Hamza and Alina, my grandchildren, playing in the street after school. But when they saw me through the gate, Samra would call them inside. She didn't even wave. Once, I went to their house unannounced, carrying a box of homemade sweets. The ones Sad used to beg for when he was small. Samra opened the door, her smile thin as thread. "Oh, Auntie," she said, stepping halfway into the doorway so I couldn't see inside. "The kids aren't home. Maybe another time." Her eyes darted left and right, nervous. Then I heard a small voice. "Nani." It was Alina. She peeked from behind her mother's legs, her little hands sticky from candy. I smiled, tears rising to my eyes. "There's my girl. Come. Beta." But before she could take a step, Samra's hand clamped around her arm. "Inside," she whispered sharply. The door closed. I stood there with that box of sweets in my trembling hands, not knowing what to do. The wind picked up, and one of the sweets fell to the ground. I stared at it, rolling away, leaving a little trail of syrup on the dusty tiles. That's how my heart felt. Dropped, dirty, forgotten. I walked home slowly, whispering to myself, "You raised a family, but you lost a home." Weeks turned into months. The court case dragged on. Each hearing was a slow bleed, Sad sitting on one side, avoiding my eyes, and me on the other, clutching Nadia's hand for strength. His lawyer said words I'll never forget. Your Honor, my client believes his mother's recent actions show emotional instability. She's been exploited, and her financial judgment can't be trusted. Exploited. Unstable. I wanted to scream. To stand and say, I raised that man with my own hands. I fed him from my plate. How dare he call me unfit? But my throat locked. Instead, I just sat there, watching my son speak lies about the woman who once carried him on her back when his legs were too tired to walk. When the hearing ended, Sad brushed past me. I caught his sleeve, whispering, Beta, why are you doing this? I'm still your mother. He pulled away, eyes cold. You made your choice, Ma. Now live with it. Those words hit harder than any slap. I went home that night and wept like a child. For hours, I cried into the old shawl Yasin used to wrap around me when winters got cruel. If he had been alive, he would have held Sad by the shoulders and said, This isn't how you speak to your mother. But Yasin was gone, and I was left to fight ghosts and blood at the same time. It was sometime after that when I fell ill. Maybe it was the stress, maybe the grief, maybe both. Days blurred into nights. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Memories replaying like cruel dreams. Once, I fainted in the kitchen. When I opened my eyes, the nurse from the neighborhood clinic was standing over me, saying softly, Auntie, you shouldn't be alone. Do you have family nearby? Family. What a strange word, I almost laughed. I did. I whispered. But they've gone. She stayed with me that evening, helped me eat, helped me take my medicine. Her name was Miriam. Kind eyes, gentle voice. She reminded me of the way I used to be when I was young. She said, You need rest. Stop worrying about people who sleep peacefully while you cry. Her words hit deep. That night, for the first time, I admitted to myself. I was exhausted. Not just of fighting, but of hoping. The next morning, I woke up early. The light was soft, almost golden. I went through the cupboards gathering Sad's old things. His school trophies, his childhood drawings. The tiny handprints we'd made in clay when he was 7. I packed them into a box. And then, with shaking hands, I wrote a letter. My dear Sad, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because my heart can't carry this weight any longer. You were my greatest joy and my deepest wound. I hope one day you realize that no amount of property, no money, no house, can ever equal the peace you destroy when you hurt your own mother. If ever you come looking for me, I'll be gone. But I pray you find kindness waiting where greed once lived. I left the letter on the table beside his cracked teacup. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the smell of home, turmeric, dust, and old flowers. Then I locked the door and stepped outside. I didn't know where I was going. Only that I couldn't stay. I went to stay at a small women's hostel in the city. The rent was modest, the walls thin, but for the first time in years I felt safe. No one shouted there, no one accused. No one asked me to sign papers or justify my love. Sometimes, in the evenings, Miriam would visit after her shift. She'd bring samosas, and we'd sit by the window, watching the city lights. She'd say, You've survived worse, Auntie. You'll survive this too. And slowly, I began to believe her. But even as I tried to heal, the court case continued in my absence. Nadia handled it for me, bless her heart. She'd visit once a week, updating me gently, saying, He's losing ground. The court is starting to see the truth. Still, part of me felt hollow. Because no matter who won on paper, I had already lost my son. There was one night I'll never forget. I was sitting by the window, rain tapping softly against the glass, when I thought I saw Sad standing across the street, drenched, still silent. I blinked and he was gone. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe my heart just wasn't ready to let go. But that vision, real or not, reminded me of something my husband once said: love can survive betrayal, but only if it learns to stand for itself. And that's when I knew I couldn't stay broken forever. That night marked the end of my tears. The next would mark the beginning of my strength, because sometimes you must walk through fire before you remember you were born of light. For days, I barely left my bed. The house was too quiet, yet somehow it screamed. Every corner carried a memory that hurt to look at. The sofa where Adil would sit, scrolling through his phone while I made tea, the corner by the window where I'd fold his clothes, dreaming of his future. Even the walls felt like they were watching me, asking questions I couldn't answer. But then, something inside me began to stir. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something deeper. A strange, burning need to understand what I had done wrong, and what I truly deserved. It started the morning I opened my drawer and found an old envelope. My husband's handwriting on the front, for her, in case she ever feels lost. I hadn't touched that letter in years. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside there were just a few words. Remember who you were before you gave everything away. You were strong, Amina. You still are. Tears rolled down, but they felt different this time. Not helpless. Cleansing. That same afternoon I went out for a walk. It had been weeks since I'd stepped outside. The sun was soft, not harsh. Children played cricket in the street. Women chatted by the corner shop. Life was still moving? It hadn't stopped just because mine had. At the park, I sat on a bench near the old banyan tree. I used to take Adil there when he was little. He'd chase pigeons until he'd fall laughing, covered in dust. And every time he fell, I'd pick him up. Every single time. As I sat there lost in thought, a gentle voice interrupted me. "Excuse me, are you all right, sister?" I turned. It was an older woman, maybe my age. She had kind eyes and carried a small thermos. I tried to smile. "I'm fine," I said automatically. She didn't believe me. "You don't look fine," she said softly. "Sit with me. I bring tea every evening. It helps with broken hearts." That's how I met Nasreen. We sat together for hours that day. I told her everything, from Adil's shouting to the cold silence that followed. She listened, really listened, without interrupting. And when I finished, she took a deep breath and said something that pierced my soul. "You didn't lose your son, Amina. You lost the illusion that he saw you as his mother." "That's not the same thing." I froze. "What do you mean?" She looked straight into my eyes. "Some children love the comfort their parents provide. The home, the meals, the sacrifices. But they never truly see their parents as people. They see them as providers. The moment you stop giving, they stop loving. That's not love. That's need." I felt a shiver run through me. Her words opened a truth I had avoided for years. That evening, for the first time in a long time, I looked at myself in the mirror. Not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a woman. I saw the lines on my face, the tired eyes, the streaks of gray in my hair, and I whispered, "You deserve peace too." That night, I slept without tears. The next few days brought a quiet determination. I started cleaning the house. Not out of habit, but out of renewal. I donated half of Adil's old things to a charity nearby. I cooked for myself, not for anyone else. And one morning, I went to the bank. When the clerk looked at me over the counter and asked, "Are you sure you want to transfer full ownership to yourself?" I nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I am." It was time to take my life, and my name, back. On my way out of the bank, I saw a familiar face. Farah, my husband's old lawyer and a family friend. She had always liked me and used to handle our property matters. When she saw me, she smiled kindly. "Amina G! It's been years!" "How are you?" Something made me tell her everything. Maybe because I trusted her, or maybe because I needed someone who understood the legal weight of my pain. She listened, her expression darkening with every word. "Adil accused you of selling the apartment without him." "Yes. But Amina, that property was legally transferred to you years ago. Your husband made sure of that before he passed. Adil has no claim." "None." Her certainty gave me a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that I wasn't wrong. Sorrow that my own son knew this but still chose to hurt me. Farah leaned forward. "If he continues to harass or threaten you, we can take action. Don't let him guilt you into anything. You have rights, and you deserve respect." That night, I wrote a letter to Adil. Not to fight, but to free myself. "My dear son, I have loved you in every way a mother knows how. But love cannot exist where respect has died. I sold the apartment because I needed to stand on my own feet. Not because I wanted to take anything from you. I hope one day you'll understand that giving life to someone doesn't mean giving them the right to destroy yours. Take care of your home, your wife, your heart. But know that from today, I am choosing peace, even if that means walking alone. I sealed the envelope, placed it in the mail, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pride. It was liberation. A week later, Nasreen and I met again at the park. She brought me tea, and I brought her gratitude. "You look different," she said with a smile, like someone who finally let go of the rope that was cutting her hands. I laughed softly. "Maybe I have." She took a slow sip of her tea and looked at the sky. "You know, sometimes God doesn't punish people by taking things away from them. He punishes them by letting them keep what they wanted and watching it destroy them." Her words stayed with me, because deep down I knew, one day, Adil would realize what he had done. Maybe not now, maybe not soon. But time has a way of returning lessons. For now I was content with silence. With tea under the banyan tree. With a heart that had stopped breaking long enough to start beating again. I began volunteering at a women's center Nasreen told me about. Many of them had stories like mine. Widows, single mothers, women abandoned by their own families. We shared tears but also laughter. I realized that pain loses its power when you speak it out loud, and one afternoon, as I helped a young girl fill out forms, she said softly, "Auntie, you talk like you've been through hell." I smiled. "I have, child." But I came back with a map. It was in that moment I knew my life had turned. I no longer waited for apologies or explanations. I no longer looked at the door expecting my son to walk in. Because sometimes, peace doesn't come from getting back what you lost. It comes from finally letting go of what was never yours to keep. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when I heard the knock at my door. Not the gentle kind. The kind that carries urgency, anger, guilt. I hesitated before opening it. And there he was. Adil. He looked thinner, restless. The arrogance that once coated his every word had faded into something else: desperation. His shirt was creased, his eyes red. Behind him stood his wife, arms folded, her gaze sharp like a blade. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Only the sound of a fan turning slowly above the empty living room filled the silence. Then he said it. Voice trembling but laced with blame. "Ami, why did you do this?" I kept my tone calm. "Do what, Beta?" He stepped closer. "Sell the apartment. That was supposed to be our future. Our home. You didn't even ask me." I looked at him quietly. "Adil, that apartment was my husband's gift to me. Your father made it clear. It was never yours to claim." His wife scoffed. "You're lying. You did it just to hurt us. To make us suffer." I took a slow breath, steadying the storm in my chest. "No. I did it because I needed to stop suffering." For a moment, silence again. He looked at me, and for a flicker of a second, I saw my little boy in his eyes. The one who used to hold my hand when crossing the street. But then that boy disappeared, replaced by a man shaped by greed and pride. He slammed his hand against the table. "You ruined everything! We were counting on that money!" His words stung. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Like I was a burden. Like my existence had been an inconvenience in his plans. I folded my hands calmly on the table. "Adil, I didn't sell it to spite you. I sold it because I needed to build a life that didn't depend on anyone's permission." His wife rolled her eyes. "So what now? You're some kind of saint. Living alone, acting like you're better than us." I stood then, slowly, deliberately. "Better. No, child, just free." That word, free, seemed to burn the air between us. Adil's voice cracked. "You're my mother. You should have trusted me." I looked at him long and hard. "Trust. Adil? Trust is built by honesty and respect. You took both from me the day you shouted that I sold something that never belonged to you. You made me feel like a thief in my own home." He looked away, ashamed but silent. I continued softly. "Do you know what it feels like when your own child treats you like a stranger? When every sacrifice turns invisible, like smoke in the wind?" He said nothing. His wife's eyes darted between us, sensing his crumble. I turned to her then. And you, dear, I don't blame you, but you should know. A man who disrespects his mother will one day turn that same disrespect toward his wife. It's not a curse. It's a pattern. Her lips parted, but no words came. Adil clenched his fists. You've changed, Ami. You talk like someone else. I smiled faintly. No, Adil. I've finally started talking like myself. He looked down, defeated. So this is it. You're just done with me. The mother in me? The one who once couldn't sleep without knowing where he was. Wanted to reach out, to hold him. To tell him it would all be okay. But the woman in me, the one who had been betrayed, blamed, and broken, knew this was a lesson he had to learn without my arms around him. I'll never stop being your mother, I said softly. But I won't let you hurt me again. Not with your words, not with your silence. Just then, the doorbell rang again. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, it was Farah, the lawyer, holding a brown envelope. She nodded politely. Hamina ji, I have the finalized documents you requested. The sale is complete, and the proceeds have been transferred securely to your account. No one can contest it. Adil stiffened. Contest? What are you talking about? Farah looked him straight in the eye. Your father's will left the apartment solely in your mother's name. Any attempt to claim it now would be legally void. His face went pale. Farah handed me the papers. You made the right choice, she said gently, then turned to leave. The silence that followed was heavy, like years of denial collapsing in one breath. Adil's voice cracked again. You really went this far? I met his eyes, firm but calm. No, Beta. You pushed me this far. He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. For the first time, I saw something real: regret, confusion, maybe even shame. His wife stood frozen, unsure what to do. I walked to the window, looking out at the small garden. The wind rustled the leaves, soft, forgiving. When your father died, I began quietly. I promised him I'd raise you with kindness. But I forgot one thing. Kindness without boundaries becomes weakness. And weakness invites cruelty. I turned back to him. I'm not weak anymore. He finally spoke, voice low. Ami, I didn't mean to. I raised a hand gently. Don't say what you think I want to hear. Say what you need to hear. He swallowed hard. I was wrong. A tear slipped down my cheek. Not of pain this time, but release. I know, I whispered. But some wrongs take time to heal. He stood slowly, as if unsure whether to hug me or leave. His wife finally spoke, quieter than before. We should go. As they turned toward the door, I stopped them. Adil. He looked back, eyes red. I forgive you, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I refuse to carry your mistakes as my burden anymore. He nodded silently, his lips trembling. Then they left. The door closed behind them with a sound that didn't feel like loss this time. It felt like closure. That night, I sat in my small garden. The stars shimmered faintly between the clouds. The air smelled of jasmine and rain. Nazreen's words echoed in my heart. God doesn't always punish by taking things away. Sometimes, he lets people keep what they thought they wanted. And I knew she was right. Adil had his home, his marriage, his pride. But I had something far greater: peace. For years I had begged for love from people who only wanted control. Now I had learned the quiet, dignified power of letting go. The tears that came weren't bitter anymore. They were soft, clean, like water washing away the last traces of pain. A week later, I received a letter. Handwritten, trembling script. Ami, I don't know how to face you after what I've done. Everything you said was true. I was blinded by greed, by pride. The apartment, the money, none of it feels worth what I lost. I see you now, not as a mother who gave me things, but as a woman who gave me life. I hope one day you'll let me sit beside you again. Adil. I held that letter to my heart, closed my eyes, and smiled. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come in courtrooms or through lawyers. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, in the form of realization. That night, I whispered to the wind, thank you, Allah, for teaching me that love without respect is not love at all. It's servitude. And as the stars blinked above me, I knew I was finally free. It's strange, you know, How silence can become the sweetest sound once the noise of pain fades away. It's been months since that day. The day Adil came to my door with anger in his eyes and left with the weight of truth on his shoulders. The garden has grown since then. My jasmine vines climb higher, and sometimes, when the wind blows just right, their scent fills every corner of this small house. And I've changed too. Every morning, I brew my tea and sit by the window, letting the first light touch my face. I no longer wait for phone calls or apologies. My peace doesn't depend on who remembers me anymore. It depends only on who I choose to be today. Sometimes, neighbors ask me, Amina Appa, don't you miss your son? I smile softly. Of course I do. A mother's heart never forgets. But love and longing are not the same thing. You see, I still love Adil. I always will. But now I love him without losing myself. That's the difference. I think back to who I was, the woman who cried behind closed doors, begging God to change her son's heart. And I look at who I am now, the woman who prays, not for others to change, but for her own heart to remain kind, even when life isn't. Pain has its own strange mercy. It breaks you open so the truth can finally enter. And here's what truth taught me. Love without respect is a cage. Forgiveness is not surrender, it's freedom. And the people who walk away from you were never meant to stay for the part of your life where you finally rise. Last week, as I was closing the gate after watering the plants, a car stopped by the road. Adil stepped out. Alone. He didn't say much, just held my hand and said, Amy, I brought your favorite sweets. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't have to. Sometimes silence can do what 1,000 apologies cannot. He sat in the garden while I poured tea, the same way we used to, before life got complicated, before pride built walls between us. And as we sat there, sipping quietly, I realized something. He wasn't the same man who shouted that day, and I wasn't the same woman who broke down in tears. Life had changed us both, humbled us, healed us. Now when I tell my story to women at the community center, I see their eyes fill with the same kind of pain I once carried. And I always tell them, you are allowed to walk away from what destroys your peace. You are allowed to say no. Even to your own child, when love turns into a weapon. Because motherhood should never mean martyrdom. And kindness should never mean silence. I know my journey isn't over. No one's ever is. But these days, when I walk through my little garden, I feel something I hadn't felt in years: gratitude. Gratitude that life, even in its cruelty, gave me the gift of awakening. Gratitude that love, even when lost, left behind wisdom. And gratitude that I can finally breathe not in fear, but in peace. So if you're listening to my story tonight, if you've been betrayed by the ones you loved most, or made to feel small in a home you built with your own hands, please remember this: true love cannot be bought, and freedom is worth any price, even the price of walking alone. And you, my dear, what would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven? Or would you have walked away? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your heart.